Senator Ted Cruz is trying to court the so-called GOP establishment. He's now won the endorsement of former rivals Jeb Bush and Lindsey Graham, and he is the closest to Donald Trump in the delegate count as the Stop Trump movement attempts to gain some footing. Joining us now, Karl Rove, former senior advisor and deputy chief of staff to President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. You know that Senator Ted Cruz of Texas has spent most of his time in the Senate excoriating Republican leadership. Now, Republican leaders seem to be flocking to him. Maybe flocking is a bit strong, but he is winning the endorsement of people like Jeb Bush. Is that going to be the solution to those who want to stop Donald Trump from getting the Republican nomination?
Well, I think you need to divorce the members of the Senate from people who are not members of the Senate. You'll notice that he's received the endorsement of, as you say, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who did not have to work with him in the Senate. And in the Senate, he has gotten the support of Mike Lee of Utah, a longtime friend and companion of him in some of his endeavors, and Senator Lindsey Graham, who said, I think, choosing between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz was picking between two forms of poison. So you'll notice the other 51 members of the Senate have been loath to flock to the support of Ted Cruz, even though they deeply fear Donald Trump. And it's a reminder that in politics it's sometimes not just policy, sometimes it's also personal, and a lot of them have some personal feelings about Ted Cruz that are difficult to overcome.
Well, he has a long-standing feud with Mitch McConnell, essentially called McConnell a liar, the leader of the Senate Republicans and now majority leader of the U.S. Senate. Apparently those two have not patched things up. Does that have to occur before Cruz can get more of the so-called establishment support?
Well, I think it would help. But look, it's bigger and broader than just one person, Mitch McConnell. Remember, Cruz comes to the Senate in January of 2013, and by that fall has jammed the Senate Republicans into supporting a shutdown of the government over the refusal of the president to sign a repeal of Obamacare. The House passes a measure repealing Obamacare, and that very afternoon, Senator Cruz announces that he really has no strategy to get the Senate, to get 60 votes in the Senate, because Republicans at that point were in the minority. You needed 60 votes to bring up the measure, and he admitted he had no strategy to get the votes necessary to take care of that. And then what happens is that the Senate Republicans, he starts an effort with the Senate Conservative Fund that calls for replacing sitting members of the Senate by name in primaries in 2014. And this doesn't sit well with his colleagues. And then he starts referring to them as a cartel, a term normally reserved for Mexican drug dealers. So there's a lot of personal animosity here, a lot to get over, and it's going to be hard for Senator Cruz to get a lot more people like Senator Graham, who simply do it because they want to defeat Donald Trump. There needs to be a personal effort on his part in order to get these people in his corner. Otherwise, it's going to be the onesies and twosies and not the dozens of members of the Senate that would be needed to make this a big effort.
Here's a line from Jonathan Martin and Matt Flegenheimer in the New York Times today. They write, while the Romney and Bush endorsements, which we talked about, drew headlines, what has been just as striking is the sound of silence from the vast majority of Republican elected officials and leading donors. Nearly 2 weeks after Senator Marco Rubio dropped out of the race, there has been no mass rush to Mr. Cruz, even as he appears to be the last line of defense against a Trump nomination. Can you explain why? I mean, are there people who still hope that John Kasich is somehow going to pull this out?
Well, I think there's some people who hope Kasich pulls it out, some who hope that a yet unnamed candidate emerges from the chaos of the convention. But a lot of it goes back to, look, in politics, the impressions you create initially are hard to overcome. And a lot of donors, I've talked to a number of donors who said, look, I don't live in Texas, but Cruz came and called on me. And they said, you know, I just found it hard to talk to him. He didn't listen to me. He didn't pay attention to me. It was a monologue. I've never spent 45 minutes just simply listening to somebody talk about themselves. These kind of personal impressions cause people to sort of say, you know what, do I want to be eager about jumping in? And look, there's also just a lot of confusion. People are saying, well, do we have a chance to stop Trump? If we have a chance to stop Trump, shouldn't we try and get one candidate? If we're going to have two candidates, shouldn't they be sort of signaling each other that some of them are, that one candidate's going to play in, say, Cruz in Utah and Kasich in Pennsylvania, and start signaling that publicly? So there's just a lot of confusion that adds to it. But at the base of it, if you go back to it, in politics, a lot of it is what's the impression that you create, either through your actions through the media or through your personal one-on-one interactions. And Senator Cruz, with all his enormous skills and talents, has proven himself not to be a very likable person.
But as you well know, I mean, Donald Trump is appealing to a lot of people in the Republican Party who feel that he reflects their needs, their concerns, whether it be immigration or trade agreements, you know, lack of jobs for blue-collar workers. Those are the people who are flocking to Trump, and many say they feel that they have been abandoned by the traditional Republican Party.
Yeah. Look, there's always been a sort of a populist minority in the party, and Trump's gotten about 37% of the vote. Not all of that comes from populists. Some of it comes from people who like that he's a strong leader and is not politically correct and says what he wants to say. Some support him because he's a business person. But some of them do come from sort of the populist economic wing of the party, particularly in the South, places where textile workers or manufacturing has been hurt by the fact that we've opened our trade, reduced our barriers to the importation of foreign goods and services, and it's understandable. We saw this in 2000, for example, when George W. Bush was running for president. We had a bad issue with China over steel imports. The Chinese were dumping, and President Bush, then Governor Bush in the campaign, acknowledged that if he were president, he would use the tools available to him to crack down on this, which he did by invoking a thing called Section 301 when he became president, and it caused the Chinese to back down. But this group needs to, you need to deal with them by having a realistic answer. This morning on a radio program in Milwaukee, Donald Trump basically said, look, I recognize that what I'm saying about China is a negotiating tactic, and that I'm going to try and bluff my way through. The tools to deal with a lot of this are difficult and really don't generate a large outcome in some instances, because, look, there are places where we've got an advantage in what we make and what we do and what we sell, and there are other places where other people have an advantage in what they say and make and do. And so when it comes to trade, we don't have an advantage in each and every area all the time, every time, and neither does any other country.
All right, Karl Rove, we'll continue to follow this process as the party finally selects who it's going to nominate for president. Karl Rove, thank you.
And it ain't going to be a pretty process, John. It's not going to be a pretty process.
Doesn't look like it. Thank you.
Yeah.